Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from. My name is Claire. I work for the British Council. I'm the moderator for today's session on adapting games for offline learning. Various speakers from 4 very different contexts today to talk to you a little bit about what they're doing, both in response to COVID-19, but I think more broadly thinking about how to adapt learning to offline, remote or rural situations. I'm going to give a brief introduction of each of our speakers and then let them talk to you for about 6 or 7 minutes about what they've involved in. At the end of the session, there'll be time for you to ask any questions that you have, but please feel free to write them in the chat on the right-hand side so that all the speakers can get ready to answer your questions later on. Our very first speaker is Bidemi Nelson. If you give us a little wave, she's joining us from Nigeria. And she's been involved in Edu-Toons and Edu-Games, thinking about how to use problem solving and cartoons to engage kids in real learning situations. So she's going to talk to you about 6 minutes now, describing a little bit about the work that she's done, and then we'll meet the rest of our speakers later on. So Bidemi, over to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bidemi Nelson, and I work with the Shield of Innocence Initiative, a non-governmental organization based in Nigeria. 2 of our products, which we develop to educate children, particularly those who have not been attending school, and also displaced children, are called Edu-Toons and Edu-Games. And I'll be talking about that today. So I'll just move to my presentation quickly, which is titled Edu-Toons and Edu-Games, Leveraging Animations and Games in Formal Education. And so basically, we would like to look at what formal education is, and these are the things that encouraged us to develop these learning products. And formal education, the features now are that they make teaching and learning in organized ways, and teaching and learning are usually in a school system. Progress and academic outcomes as of teaching within the same school system. Now, here are some of the gaps in formal education, and these are some of the reasons why we developed Edu-Toons and Edu-Games. Now, the success of formal education is believed to be hugely dependent on the existence of schools and its attendance. And also, education is not accessible to every child because not every child can attend school. And many times, particularly here in Africa, we don't have school resources. Also, actual learning and effective assessments are not guaranteed. And besides that, educational content can sometimes be irrelevant for work or life skills. So we began to critique formal. We looked at formal education in the traditional settings, and then using animations and games to provide formal education to learners. So we critiqued formal education in the traditional settings by looking at the channels. Now, within education in traditional settings, learners must be located in a school and classrooms for learning to take place. And if you look at the process, traditional classroom teaching usually must be employed. And such an example of this learning is what you call the rote learning. And then if you look at the feedback, you see that traditional test and assignment systems, which is abstract and boring in many cases, are adopted. It also does not assist learners identify learning gaps individually and specifically. But when you check out animations and games, particularly for Edu-Toons and Edu-Games, you find out that the channels, learners do not necessarily have to be in a school or in a classroom to learn. And if you look at the process, we don't adopt the traditional classroom teaching to teach learners, but we adopt the process of storytelling, problem identification, problem exploration, and carefully sequence solving. And the feedback, of course, we make use of simple computer games that simulate real-life problems and help learners identify their learning gaps individually and specifically. Now, Edu-Toons and Edu-Games are educational solutions for primary school level learners, and these educational solutions make use of animations and games to teach and to assess. Besides that, Edu-Toons and Edu-Games complement each other because Edu-Toons teaches the curriculum lessons to the students, while Edu-Games assesses actual provide education to displaced children. And this is because a lot of children are now out of school in pandemic. And Edu-Toons and Edu-Games are also made in official and vernacular languages because our target, which are children who have never been to school before, we see that some of them may not be able to understand what we are teaching if we use the official languages. So we decided to make these products also in vernacular languages. One of the languages we have used apart from English is the Hausa language, which is used in northern Nigeria. Edu-Toons and Edu-Games are also considered COVID-19 educational solutions and can also be used within traditional school settings to assist learners and teachers. They are easily categories of learners, irrespective of their economic class, because they make use of mass media channels such as televisions for animations and phones for games. And here is our work so far with Edu-Toons and Edu-Games. If you look at the slide closely, when we first made Edu-Toons, we did a pilot, and that pilot is titled Louis Pendantic. And Louis Pendantic is the aspect of our product that deals with all mathematical lessons. And here we see the amount of people we've reached. We reached over 10,000 people because at the time we deployed this product, the COVID pandemic had started. So we had to use social media platforms to spread out what we have developed to learners all around Nigeria and outside of Nigeria. So we were able to get this feedback from people that used this product to learn. And then here is the topic of the Louis Pendantic mathematics teaching tool, which I spoke about earlier. And here are some of the slides we used also to teach, particularly for the Louis Pendantic teaching tool that I just mentioned. And here we see children talking about how to share, how to solve sharing problems using fractions. And we go to the board to see how this can be done to make it easy for learners and understand. So basically, Edu-Toons and Edu-Games tries to bring curriculum-based education to learners such that it's not in the traditional setting, it's not in the traditional form, but it's in a fun and exciting way. And these children can relate to it because when it comes to cartoons and games, you get children's attention easier and for longer. And here's our commitment with Edu-Toons and Edu-Games. We will ensure that the continuation of formal learning will continue to take place, whether it's within or outside the school settings. We also ensure and we are committed to actual learning outcomes relevant for life and work skills. If you remember what I said earlier about simulating real-life problems when it comes to the games, in assessing if actual learning has taken place. So we are not going to be abstract at all in impacting knowledge and assessment to our learners. And then we are committed to effective assessments where both learners and teachers can identify learning gaps almost immediately. We are also committed to providing primary school curriculum-based education to children who ordinarily are not catered for by their government or resident countries' educational system. And by this, I mean, in some countries, my country, for instance, a lot of children do not go to school because they are not catered for by the government. And in some other countries, a lot of children are displaced. So we are going to cater for their education, even though they haven't, been admitted or enrolled into school just yet. And then we are committed to bridging learning disparities among primary school learners globally by encouraging collaboration in curriculum content and development, teachers networking, and the exploration of animations and games to teach. I'd like to thank you for listening, and that's about my slide presentation for now. I want to also add that we are in the process of making more products, more learning content available for all our learners. So we're looking at making 60 more educational content available to learners. So we need a lot of collaboration. We need a lot of working together with different educational stakeholders, both in Africa and around the world. So we would welcome everyone who is willing to join us to come on board and make learning a reality for every child, whether or not they are in school. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for that, Bidemi. It's amazing how quickly 6 minutes can go and how much you managed to pack into there. For everyone else that was listening, any questions that you have, please put them in the chat. Tony's already got a question for you, which you can start thinking about now, Bidemi. In the meantime, we'll move on to our next speaker, who is Maria Zandt. Maria, can you turn on your camera? There you are. Bidemi, if I can ask you to turn your camera off. Maria is the founder of Abracadabra. She manages a Pan-African youth group, and she works a lot in, particularly in places like Ethiopia and Rwanda, and is going to be talking to you a little bit today about the work that they've been doing in providing local language content and accessing parents as educators. So over to you, Maria.
Thank you so much, Claire. I'm very excited to be here and to share some of our ideas and lessons that we have learned with our Abracadabra learning environment. I'm gonna share my screen. I hope you can see it. So yes, Abracadabra actually starts with a story that I would like to take you through in northern Ethiopia. And so please join me on this journey to northern Ethiopia, and more precisely to a very small remote village nearby where I had the chance to travel to about a year ago. And in this very small village, which is tucked in the mountains of Ethiopia, which is very high up, there live a lot of children who have never seen school or have only seen very shortly. And amongst those two children, I met Tigers and Mita. And just want to share their story to tell you a little bit more how we came up with the idea of Abracadabra. So Tigers was about 8 years old, and she has been going to school for a bit, but she can barely write her name. And her little sister, Mita, that you see on the right-hand side, she is about 3, will probably not see school very soon, because school for them is not only not available in their village, but it's also very far away. It's about 7 kilometers walk for them to go to school, and there's no preschool offer in that village. And when we were there, and I took my kids with me, we started playing actually with those kids, and just writing things into the sand and playing with sticks and stones. And so we started thinking with some of the people there, how could we make early education actually accessible to those kids, not waiting for formal education centers to come there. And this is where this story of Abracadabra started. And I just want to highlight a couple of things why we are investing in early learning. First of all, the numbers, some of you know, even before COVID, there was only 1 out of 4 children in sub-Saharan Africa going to preschool. And with the COVID crisis, that number has further decreased. So there are very few kids actually going to preschool or having the possibility to have early learning offers in a formal education system. It's so important to invest in early education because it lies actually the foundation, essential skills. And the great pedagogist Montessori actually talked about the period that happened in the first years and the first 6 years. So once this time is gone, actually, the children never ever learn so easily anymore. Skills like writing, counting, and then those gaps often persist through the whole educational cycle. Another thing that research has shown that children learn best when they're engaged in playful activities, and I think the whole conference is about that. However, we see still a lot of curricula being very formal and lacking all kinds of creative, playful engagement with children. So very often, even if they learn in the school, a lot of this learning disappears because children haven't been able to engage with it, with their hands, their ears, smelling, touching. And thirdly, very surprisingly, maybe, most important learning actually plays at home. So there's a study by the OECD that amongst many factors actually found that the home environment is the most important factor to nurture education and learning, not only during the COVID crisis, but also beyond that. And this is the foundation actually for Abracadabra. So when the COVID crisis kicked in, we started to think about with some passionate parents and education specialists in Ethiopia, Rwanda, and Nigeria, how could we empower parents to become experts in creative learning themselves? So not waiting for the school, but taking it themselves into their hand. And this is when we started sending to parents about 3 times a week creative education tips, as well as creative early learning activities. And you see here on the side one of those examples. Our aim is to make that very accessible. So our target group are really parents with children 3 to 6 years old living in low-income urban or rural communities. And we want to bring that to parents' fingertips. So really, when a parent opens their mobile phone, that they have in their hand what they could do with their kids without having to search for a lot of materials and a lot of things to do. So we started sending things to a telecom channel, but are also now considering sending information via SMS and voice message. I'm going to talk in a bit. So how does it really work? So we sent them a set of playful activities. All of those activities, they relate to early literacy, to early numeracy, to creativity, but they're all based on actually games that you can do, things that you can build with local materials. So that is the second bit, which is very important about our approach. We only send activities that can be done with things that parents find in the household, that you can find about your house in the nature, and that you don't need to have a lot of preparation. We also send parents playful parenting tips, because we found that a lot of parents struggle with this idea of playful learning. People are very much used to this more formal school academic curriculum. And from the very beginning, we wanted to be present for several parents in different countries. This is how we started publishing from the very start in different languages. And why could we do that? Because our content is very short. It's a step-by-step guidance that is very easily translatable into different local languages and can also be adapted to the local school curriculum. So we run pilots since May in Ethiopia and Rwanda. We reached about 250 parents in those two countries, publishing information through the telecom channel, as you see here, in Kinyarwanda, Amharic, and English. And those channels are then owned by our local education specialists who engage the parent community around that. What we're currently up to is to reach out to more rural communities. And what we found is that having a mobile phone is still not very common in some countries like Ethiopia. So it's not only the mobile data, it's also access to a mobile phone. And this is why we started thinking around a network, a learning network that parents could access. So coming back to our village in Lalibela, how could that so the parents and Meta would actually get via SMS or via voice message a parental playful learning tip as well as an early learning activity if they have a mobile phone. But they would also be supported, and especially in the case that they don't have a mobile phone, by community early educators. And so those community early educators play a very crucial role in terms of motivating parents, reaching out, explaining the importance of early learning in the community. Community early educators could be local teachers, but could also be parents who are a bit more educated and have a passion for education. They are supported by continuous training that they receive on their mobile phone, as well as peer coaches through local regional networks, education networks. And we are currently starting testing out, piloting this virtual training for communities to see how that's going and how those community early educators could then reach out to parents in the future. So this is what we started doing with Abracadabra, and we believe that through this approach, early education actually can become more accessible to more children in sub-Saharan Africa and beyond. And why is that? Because we believe that if we empower communities and parents themselves take on this education role, then we can much more bridge that gap actually that the parents don't have to wait until anymore for those formal education come to them, but they take it on themselves with the means that they have in their community. So I'll stop sharing there and very happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that, Maria. And again, to all of the attendees, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat on the right-hand side. On to our next presenter now, who is Shanna Kohn. Shanna, can you share your video with us?
Hi, everyone. Hi.
Shanna is...
Screen.
Yeah, just give me a second. No, you're fine. Shannon is the Senior Education Manager as part of the Humanitarian programs, working on content development for Ahlan Simsim. which she's going to talk to you a little bit more about in terms of what they've done in the Levant and more broadly in the.
Thanks, Claire. So sharing my short presentation. So as Claire mentioned, Ahlan Simsim is a large-scale ECD intervention in the Middle East designed to serve children and families affected by displacement. And initially it was conceived, or it is, a direct services program combined with mass media. So Sesame Workshop creates television programs. Some of you may be familiar with Sesame Street, and we're creating a localized version in the Middle East. And then our partner, International Rescue Committee, works on direct services programming for refugees and displaced populations that are designed for caregivers and for children. So preschool programs, parenting classes, home visits, etc. In the current climate, we had to think very creatively on how to adapt this, particularly the direct services programming, to work in a digital landscape. So largely my colleagues at the IRC, and unfortunately Manar couldn't be here to present with me today, work to adapt their programming to basically be distributed over WhatsApp to parents on their phones. And it uses a lot of the rich ECD learning materials that are a part of the classroom learning, including Sesame Workshop's video programming, and then supports caregivers to basically become the facilitators of that learning. In terms of the curriculum and the focus areas of this work, we know COVID knowledge and prevention is important, but we also know now more than ever that early childhood development is particularly important as children are out of school. So we really combined the COVID response messaging with ECD awareness raising, and then messaging on caregiver and child well-being, because this is a difficult time for all of us. And then finally, and I hear some of this echoed in my colleagues who spoke earlier, activity-based programming and play tips for caregivers to play with their children at home. So I'll give a quick example of what that looks like. And I'm actually going to try to play the video. Claire, if you could just holler if the sound isn't working, and I'll pause it.
It seems to be working. Oh, no, can't really hear much, but I think if you can just talk us through what's happening.
Sure. So it's basically, I'll pause here because it's hard for me to talk and listen at the same time. Hadi, the male kind of game show host in this video clip, is playing a letter game with the child. So the spinner lands on a letter, and then the child needs to think of words that start with the letter M. So this is a short clip from the larger television production Ahlan Simsim that Sesame created. And what we would do is send this video to a caregiver over WhatsApp with a follow-up message. Now let's play this game together. So say to your child, I'll choose a letter, for example, M, and your answer is going to start with the letter M. And so basically this video is to inspire the child and the caregiver to reenact this game and this learning in the home. And there's a variety of videos that we offer that also address social emotional themes, but I chose this example because this is really an example of gamified learning. So a few quick learnings from the rapid research that IRC conducted on this adaptation. They did WhatsApp research with caregivers and found that messages and activities resonate most when they're localized, which is no surprise, but really important to keep in mind during the adaptation process. Simple activities with illustrations and videos, like the one I just showed, improve the user experience and seem to garner more engagement. And caregivers looked for additional activities around movement and physical activity, well-being, psychosocial support, and stress management and daily routine to help create normalcy. And there was a need to continue that sort of two-way communication with caregivers throughout the process. So rather than the messaging experience just going to them without an expected response, to make sure to continue to keep the caregivers engaged. So thank you for listening, and that's the bulk of my presentation. I'll say that Manar is really heavily involved. My colleague who couldn't be here in the implementation. So I'll do my best to answer questions. I'm more involved on the mass media side, but any questions I can't answer, I'm happy to pass along to her. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So one last speaker who's part of today's panel, and then we'll start off with a few questions that I have in hand, and thank you very much for the questions that you've sent through already. Our next speaker is Beena. Beena is the director of, excuse me if I'm pronouncing this wrong, I have been practicing all morning. Eskwelang Pamilya, but you will say it better than I can. Beena works on this sort of holistic program in the Philippines, working with, again, taking parents into that more sort of educational role and for them to be more deliberate and more in the way that they become part of education. So Beena, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, I am going to share my screen. If I can find it. Oh, no.
And at the bottom, you should see a picture of a screen with a line through it. If you click on that and then allow access.
By any chance see that? No.
Your computer should ask you if you want to give access, and you just need to click on allow. Can you see that?
Yes. Okay. Okay. Are you guys able to see it? Okay. You know what? It's okay. I will just talk about it.
Yeah. Great.
So AHA Learning Center is a non-government organization, and it basically before COVID happened, they were an after-school program for children from public schools. And when the whole pandemic happened and Manila went into lockdown, what we did was that, well, most people were focused on the health side and getting people food and all of that. But what we did was that we were thinking about the children, because it was like there was nobody thinking of the children. So what we did was that we reached out to the parents and their families, just calling all like 300 families, and asking them what they had with them. And most of them didn't have the internet. So what we did was we came up with a solution. We found a way to reach them by sending them lessons on Facebook Messenger, because it's free. It doesn't require any data. Our limitations were that we had to make sure that there were no pictures. So we made the use of emojis. We made the use of words and just basically got to work. And a team of 8, including myself, we developed plans for the children. And in May, we launched it with about 150, 300 kids. And right now, the current count is 16,000 all across the Philippines, partnered up with different organizations and public schools. They're also currently training public school teachers in the use of the mode of delivery to prepare for when school starts in October. The focus has been, and I think, I'm not currently with AHA anymore, but I developed a homeschool program for Playworks. And what the most important thing that has stood out is that relationships are really key. And it's the way you're going to find out from parents how and what they need, how you can reach them, and how you can support them. So I think that, with relationships, you're able to because as teachers, as educators, designing learning experiences are easy. That's the easy part. But empowering the parents and being able to support them through it and having that open line of communication, I think the relationship and the communication has been something that's extremely important for this day and age, and as well as the well-being of the children, because children will play, parents will play with them. It's just that we need to be able to empower them to play in a way that they're learning, because that's often a misconception that children cannot learn while they're playing, but learning happens in all aspects of life, and it's how they learn best because it's meaningful. So I think that that's probably the biggest takeaway from this whole experience. Are key. Having that open line of communication is important, and supporting the parents, because there's only so much we can do from afar. And I think that when we empower the parents, because everyone is not sure about themselves, when we empower the parents and give them the right tools, show them how to ask questions, then we are able to, like really support them. And then when we are able to hear back from them, the feedback has been amazing. So, and they themselves feel empowered. They feel so good about themselves, and they feel like they're actually educating their children. So yeah, it's back to basics. It's back to being at home with your family, and parents really taking the time out to be with their children. So I think that as a profession, the education industry has really stepped up. We've been able to adapt and support and continue to teach our kids through our parents. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm glad I managed to get through all of your content, even without having slides. That's a bit of pressure. Well done. Brilliant. All right. So now is time for our Q&A session. I have a few questions myself that I'd like to ask. But again, to the audience, if you can keep posting your questions down the right-hand side, we can get to those as we can. My first question is for Bidemi. Bidemi, can you turn your camera on? Hi.
Yeah, I'm doing that. Thank you.
So you spoke a lot about how your program kind of works in a way where formal education can't always reach the student reach. You had a question in terms of, you spoke a bit about the contrast between how school is very much rote learning and this is very much learning through play and learning through activity and learning through problem solving. How do those two systems work together to support each other? Are they connected in any way? And what do you think formal education could learn from programs like yours?
Okay, when it comes to teaching and when it comes to formal education, not totally disassociate the school system. School is everything. It will always be everything. But we are saying that we want children to learn more effectively. We want them to learn in fun ways. We want them to understand their abilities. So yes, you cannot associate Edu-Toons and Edu-Games from the traditional school system. As a matter of fact, we are supposed to complement the work that teachers and learners do at school. But even as we complement what teachers and learners do at school, we can also work on our own outside of. And that's why I stress that we are prioritizing the learning and the provision of education of school and displaced children. Because these children many times don't have any prospect of qualitative education. And if somebody doesn't do anything, the level of illiteracy among primary school learners continue to increase. So yes, we are part of the school system. When I was doing my presentation, I said that Edu-Games can support learning within school by acting as a learning aid. School also, we also actively support learning and effective assessment. So we are married together. We and school, we are not getting divorced anytime soon.
That's very good to hear. And great to see how those two systems can be complementary, and it does. I have another question. Who was involved in developing the content for those cartoons and for those games? Were kids or parents or teachers involved at all, or how did you approach that?
Okay, thank you. Basically, when we wanted to develop the content for the animations, we actually worked with teachers and parents. We found out from parents at first areas where their children were not learning, and the challenges parents were having in teaching their children whenever they were doing their homework at home. So we discovered that many parents, even after their children have learned at school, many parents did a lot of reteaching for their kids, for them to understand the subjects that have been taught at school. So a number of times, some parents found out that the methods being used by teachers in school to teach their children were not effective. Because here in Nigeria, when teachers teach, it could be very abstract and it also can be very boring. So if you're not able to get the attention of these children, and which often they try to do by caning them, flogging them, but it's not working. So at the end of the day, the children are staring at the blackboards or at the whiteboards, as the case may be, but are not learning anything. So we had to talk to parents to tell us what they felt about the methods teachers were using. And that was where we got the idea that, we can actually make learning in fun ways by making use of storytelling, by animating characters, by exploring problems, allowing children to know that the topics they are being taught at school is not an abstract thing, but something that applies to their daily lives and that can make them problem solvers in the real life, not just in the abstract thing or just to get good grades at school. So we worked with parents and we also worked with teachers. We worked with a few teachers who helped us develop the content because we had to write scripts for the animations and also had to write scripts for the games. So yes, we had to work with parents and teachers, but that's all we worked with at first.
That's really, really interesting to hear. And often you will find quite different views coming from parents, coming from teachers, and then a completely different thing coming from the kids themselves. So putting all of that data together and interpreting it into a program, I appreciate it is pretty challenging, but very much for that. Just to kind of start off our conversation, but again, if anybody else has other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Maria, you spoke about the need to work on literacy and work in local languages, particularly in places like Ethiopia and Rwanda. And I know that in a lot of places in sub-Saharan Africa, I'm from Zimbabwe, and we have our own challenges there. In a lot of places, literacy is sometimes a generational issue. So you might find that because parents might not be able to read or write, there's less sort of importance placed on that for kids. And they also feel less able to help their kids at home when they come home with all of these things that they need to learn how to read and write, and parents don't feel confident. Did you find that in your context?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of I think Beena said it quite nicely. We need to empower parents to take on that role. And that's also what we found, like a lot of parents being completely overwhelmed with that new role that they had to take on as educators during the COVID crisis and feeling like, what should I do? And what we try and do is actually showing them that it's very easy, like this playful engagement. That first of all, kids learn a lot through just playing. Like you don't have to entertain them the whole time. You don't have to teach them. Just by playing outside with what they find, they will learn so many things. They will method, they will use shape, they will talk, they will play role plays, and they will play. They will learn a lot of things just naturally. But so what we tried doing is really taking away this kind of fear of parents by showing them, here's a kind of 3-step thing. So it's very easy. Just get those 3 things, put them together, show it to your child how to use them, let the child experience it. And this is your learning experience for the day. It's a experience. So you don't have to, do a lot of things. And what we also find is encouraging people, to let their children be creative, not always putting them just the screen somewhere, but really trying to get this playful engagement going during the crisis, because we also hear from a lot of parents that the default was kind of putting those kids in front of the TV. So how do you get out of that? And what could you do other things for not having your child being bored running around in your house? So that's very much what we try doing. Helping parents to overcome that. And when we think about communities, I think it's even stronger. People feeling like not able to do it. And again, we want to show them that it's, just with the things that they do in their daily life. Like, when they're cooking, for example, you can learn so many things, so many concepts. So involve your child, explain a little bit what you're doing, let them try it out, scooping, putting things from one pot to the other, and they will get a very rich learning experience. So that is a little bit our objective, to empower parents to feel they can do it, and that is
just like what Maria was saying earlier, I think, yes, it is really about empowering parents and basically trying to explain in non-teacher speak the things that we do every day. For instance, learning phonics doesn't necessarily have to happen just in front of a book, right? They can learn how to identify beginning sounds of letters through everyday things around them. In fact, it's even more meaningful because it's things they can hold, it's things they can smell, it's things they can see, and so it's a whole experience rather than just seeing black and white pictures or colored pictures in a book. I mean, being able to hold them and really like use their senses, that really creates a more authentic experience and really relates it to the real world.
I mean, this is a question for the entire panel, and feel free to respond. But do you feel that because potentially a lot of parents had a very dull, boring kind of rote learning education themselves, that is their expectation of what learning should look like? It should be painful. It should be boring. It shouldn't be enjoyable, because if you're having fun, then you're not learning. Do you think that maybe parents might be bringing some of those views from their own educational background into this setting? Like, well, if they're playing, then they're not learning.
Yeah, maybe I come in here. I absolutely agree with you. I think that's what we very often find, especially in the rural environments. It is very much, you need to send your child to school. The child needs to pass an exam at XY point, and that's it basically. Whether the child has understood anything of what has been teaching and what he has been exam is not important. So really, that's also why we think about this in the communities, to explaining that we play and playful engagement. The kids are learning a lot actually, and it's very important for small kids to play. And taking that away is actually hindering their natural kind of development. And I think that's a very important message. That is not easy to pass it. So there's a lot of work that needs to go into that, shifting a little bit that mindset from the academic towards the more playful learning.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, we have done some other needs assessments for projects in India, South Africa, and Mexico around play. And we found even in countries where play was seen as valuable, it was seen as valuable in and of itself, but not as related to academic learning. So yeah, play is great for my child as long as they finish their homework first. So like creating that link, I think, is really what's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think cognizant of all of those beliefs and attitudes and things that, you know, parents in the community will hold about what education is and what it isn't and how it should look and feel. You know, that does take time, and I think conversations about that are incredibly important. Right. Go on.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Apart from also like sending out like lessons, you know, I think it's also checking up and hearing and being able to give advice and give tips based on like each child or each family's like issues. For instance, like, I mean, it's really, sometimes it's the small things, you know, small things that come naturally to educators. It's something that we really have to like dig deep and find a way to explain it in very simple terms and always give context to parents, because without the context, then to them it's just, oh, but they're just playing. They're not actually learning because there's no worksheet, right? So yeah, that empowerment is such a big.
I was actually going to ask you about this, Beena, because using Facebook as a sort of forum or a channel for getting out these kind of mini lessons or these things that you could try with your kids at home. Now, often what we get, we run our own kind of Facebook groups with the British Council, and I think putting content out there is one thing, but it's dealing with the volumes of kind of feedback, questions, issues, challenges that we're not always initially prepared for. Do you know what I mean? You might have kind of one content generator and a really nice, easy schedule of how these things will go out. But how do you cope with everything that comes back?
So, well, the team is not basically handling all 16,000. It's grouped into different chapters, and each chapter will usually have like their set of volunteers or their set of teachers. It gets busy because some parents are too busy to do it because they have to work, because they are marginalized, and some of them will be only send it at night. So it's really being active, and you're just on your phone the whole day. Just really taking the time out to respond, and that's why there's always like a head teacher, and then there are a group of volunteers that really help out during the day. It's scheduled so that it's the same people all the time, so there's consistency, and that's security for children as well, and also parents. And then eventually, in the beginning it was a bit slow, it picks up. And then eventually, you have parents messaging you privately as well, like, to ask for help. Oh, they're not writing or they're not doing this. And it's really that. It's just giving it time also. As with all relationships, it takes time, and even if you've had a previous relationship, this new relationship over messages, it's really challenging, right? It's so hard to express emotion, and so we use a lot of emojis, a lot of like, even just for children to be able to read through the messages, we search for an emoji. Let's say if it's she's going to the market, then the emojis are there, just so that it really aids the children in reading it independently if their parents give them their phones. So yeah.
This is a wider question for the panel. Like, I think we've all sort of seen the negative impacts of COVID-19 on teaching, on learning, on just our lives. But do you think there's anything positive that will come out of this in terms of parents being more engaged with their children's education and understanding their role as a very, very important part of that education this pandemic? Like, are we going to see that relationship between parents and teachers and schools and communities grow because there's that shared understanding of what it is to try and educate?
If I can say something, I think that educate our teachers, because you see, it comes to what parents have learned during the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'll speak from where I come from. A lot of parents haven't really been able to bring or come to the terms of how this pandemic has actually affected their children. A lot of parents are so education at the moment, but priority things. So for that message to be sent to parents, make them understand that there is a need to review learning in schools. We need to teach our teachers. We need to give our teachers that information so that they can pass it across to parents. So when teachers are empowered and enlightened as to how children can learn, particularly with the outcome of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the new things that we can imbibe into educating our children, into helping them learn in more effective and engaging ways, and to be able to carry our teachers along and educate and enlighten them, we really may not be able to carry many parents along. And I'm talking from my end because a lot of parents where I come from are illiterate. And because they don't really understand the concept of qualitative or effective education and assessments, you will simply be speaking, a foreign language to them. But the teachers will do a heck of a job in getting that message across to them. So we must carry our teachers along.
Shanna, I don't know if you found this working in the Middle East, but I lived in Jordan for 4 years, and I found that teachers or parents often didn't feel like they had the right to have any say in what kind of education their kids would have. They were like, for what happens in the school, like, and they're trained to deal with that. I shouldn't know anything about it. I shouldn't be involved in any of the decisions. I shouldn't be involved in any of the learning. Was that your experience when you were trialing some of these things out in the Middle East? Is there that disconnect between parents and schools?
Well, it's hard for me to answer completely because a lot of the research done on my side is more about informal learning, so about the television show. And while it is learning, especially, we especially feel it's learning, I don't think parents have that same block. I think that when we ask questions about what do you want to see on TV for an educational show for your children, that's an area where they do feel like they can open up. But it would be interesting to hear. I would be surprised if my IRC colleagues felt differently from you. I think that's probably true. And I think there's a great respect for the teacher.
Absolutely. I remember we wanted to run a focus group trying to compare perspectives of student parents and teachers. And we went to a school and asked to meet some of the parents. And the school principal was just, why? Why do you want to meet with the parents? Like, why is that important? And we were shocked. Fundamental. But I think, socioculturally, there's a lot of things that happen that might keep parents away from education.
That's really interesting.
There is one question that I think we've all been asking ourselves and being asked, but the question has come up yet again. How do we deal with parents who are trying to balance and juggle work and education for their kids? Any advice, any tips, anything that you've learned that you can share with the audience?
I can speak from both sides, as a parent and as a teacher. I'll speak as a parent first because that's sort of, I think that as a parent, it's difficult, to be able to juggle homeschooling, working, and just being able to prepare stuff, and then running your home. And if the family lives with an extended family, it's even harder. So I think that from a parent's perspective, understanding would be great, and as from a teacher's perspective, I think even as teachers, we are supposed to be meeting our children where they are developmentally. And so I think that this is also the case with parents. We have to, there's always a mutual respect, and I think that extends to the parents, and that includes understanding and respecting the fact that they have other responsibilities and that we are here. We just have to make ourselves always available, to let them know that we are here should they need us. Of course, it also means that we need to be able to tell them, okay, this is what we need from you, but it won't be the same. And I think that that's probably an advantage of a emergent, a progressive way of thinking of a play-based education, because you do realize that you have to meet the kids where they are, and sometimes it's different. Children learn at different paces, and so in this case, it's just parents need to work, so they're able to do things differently. It's just different working styles at the end of the day.
Have any ideas or tips for parents that are struggling to juggle all of these new roles and responsibilities?
Yeah, maybe I'd like to add to what Beena has been saying, maybe in 2 directions. I think the first is, the beauty about the play-based learning is that a lot happens automatically, as I was saying before. You don't have to enter, and actually boredom leads to a lot of creativity. So kids, it's actually good when they're turning around a little bit, looking what they could do, come up with kinds of ideas, and it's very important to be creative. So that's the number one. I think the number 2 is we have been trying doing is building up materials that parents can introduce to the child that then the child can use pretty independently. And that is a little bit the beauty about the Montessori pedagogy, that you create kind of this learning atmosphere where you introduce an activity and then the kids get so absorbed into it because it's kind of hands-on. They just love doing it over and over again, and ideally really concentrate for quite some time. Myself being a 2 preschool kids, I had conferences, I used to put out those little kind of tracing things. So you draw a line and you come up with some grains or mice or rice or anything, and you let your child look at the line with the white. It occupies them for half an hour, so you get through your conference, and there's no problem at all. So coming up with those kind of activities where kids then can continue on its own is very helpful and
it's really important. I think a lot of parents, when they think about play, have to be there either engaging directly with it, or they have to be leading it, or they have to be supervising it, or you know what I mean? They feel like it can be quite a big role for them. So possibly thinking about ways that are less structured and need less supervision, and again, kind of allow for a bit more creativity, might be a good thing for us to focus on as this pandemic continues. Brilliant. Well, I think that's most of our questions. Is there anything else any of you would like to share before we wrap up the session for today? No? All good? Well done. It was awesome having all of you here, and thank you to all of the attendees who came and watched and listened and contributed. Tony, hi.
Hi. Well, I just want to say, Claire, thanks for your capable moderation, and nothing like having a panel that has all brilliant things to say and that are prompted by questions from our audience. So I wanted to thank you, Claire, and the presenters.